So we shall move into 9.1. And that sits with me, the deferral of decision to pursue a connection to Rous. I have forwarded through to staff and councillors a slight change, which are highlighted on the screen in front of you. Up to was already there. I've just highlighted it because in one of the emails from Councillor Pugh, he mentioned that we would be locked in for 2 years, and that's not correct according to the motion as it was published. But I also included a council seeks to renegotiate an interim agreement for a reduced cost for emergency supply during this period. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hauge, thank you very much. Now, you mentioned to me that you had a slight adjustment that you would like to.
Yes, I sent through some wording for an adjustment to point 2, as is on the screen now, to add to the end of point 2, and investigates operational regimes to minimise the risk of water quality incidents, as has been done for the existing emergency line.
Councillor Support, do you have that? Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Look, councillors, we've had this debate, those of us that were in the previous term, ad nauseum. There's been, once again, a whole lot of new information that was not, none of us in the Water and Sewer Committee were privy to, that we received last night in relation to how many times an emergency pipeline, which has been supplying the Mullumbimby Industrial Estate, has been used since 2022. For me, the community spoke very clearly, and those on the Water and Sewer Committee spoke very clearly that this option needs further investigation. This is council's own water supply. Council has maintained it over the last almost 100 years. We have an opportunity here to keep Mullumbimby more resilient, support sustainability, and the option isn't, if we were to go with the argument that's been made that all of Mullumbimby will have to pay higher rates, you'd also then, are we going to start reimbursing the people of Mullumbimby who've been subsidising the Rous amounts for the last however long? For Rous, we pay more water. Back in 2020, it was more than double what we were paying for the water that we were supplied from our own supply at Laverty's Gap. Clearly, if there's so much new information and still so much discussion, and we still don't know where Rous are going to be getting their secure water supply into 2060, it is incumbent on us to listen to the community, to look into this further, and to rule out any possibility that we are letting go of an essential public asset that will supply the Mullumbimby community into the future. I'm happy to do it as an interim measure. I'm happy if there was something that became, if it failed, for example, or there was some great problem, there is nothing in this that locks us into 2 years. But the information that we're provided doesn't say that at all. The information we're provided says it's actually, there's a lot going well in that plant. And there is a future for it if we choose to make it the case. So I encourage councillors to be open to investigate this opportunity further, as has been the wish of those who sit on the Water and Sewer Committee, as has been the wish of many people in Mullumbimby and the surrounds that are interested in sustainability and how we provide diverse and sustainable water supplies into the future. Councillor Hauge, would you like to speak as seconder?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to address, I guess, some of the misinformation that's been floating around boil water alerts, because it is really dangerous to mess with our community's trust in the quality of our drinking water. And once you break that trust, it can be really hard to rebuild it. So we haven't had boil water alerts since the 2022 floods because our very talented water managers and operators make sure that the existing emergency line is in continuous use, supplying the Mullumbimby Industrial Estate. So it doesn't need to be purged to be used, and there's no delay for us accessing that emergency line. I don't see any reason that a similar operational regime couldn't be determined when the emergency line is extended. We're told that that will be complete in July 2025. And so at that point, both the eastern half and the western half of Mullumbimby will have access to emergency water. And that goes ahead regardless of our decision today. Our decision on long-term water supply strategy won't impact the construction of that really critical emergency line. Look, more broadly, the existing investigations that supposedly justify connecting to Rous are based on what I feel is a really flawed triple bottom line analysis, didn't adequately consider climate change or capture the resilience value of having multiple water sources, didn't adequately capture the environmental cost of Rous's potential future water options, also didn't adequately capture the community's opposition to the permanent connection and their attachment to the existing infrastructure. And then looking at the economics, they used a pretty low rate of annual increase for the cost of Rous water. So they used 7% per annum for the next few years, which is reasonable, but then only 2% per annum after that, which is the point in time where Rous's infrastructure costs are likely to increase because they'll be implementing their stage 3 of their future water supply. The average that we have paid over the last decade has been a 3.45% increase per annum, and actually in the last year it was more than 11%. So assuming that it's only going to be a 2% per annum increase seems flawed to me. What we're saying here today is not go and build an expensive piece of infrastructure. What we're saying today is go and do the investigations properly. This is a once-in-a-generation decision and our community really deserves it. As far as we know, the community doesn't support the decision to connect to Rous. I can appreciate that some councillors are hearing differently. If that's the case, we need to really re-engage and do it thoroughly this time. It would be great to see a more robust engagement strategy and options workshop where community can come and learn about the options and collaboratively participate in how we want to consider and weigh different factors will be ideal, because water supply decisions are always going to have trade-offs. It will always be hard to balance economic, environmental, social, cultural and resilience factors. We have a responsibility to our community to investigate this thoroughly and collaborate with them in our investigations.
Speech against.
What an alternative motion put up? There's some different words.
It would have been better to speak against and then raise your amendment, because then you get 2 bites of the cherry.
I would say, can I get advice from staff whether this is an amendment or a foreshadowed? I would say that it is contrary to what has been put on the screen and therefore foreshadowed, but I'm open to some support.
I think it isn't in line with the original motion, so it would be considered a foreshadowed motion in this case.
Just a point of order on that then. If this is a foreshadowed, which is to reiterate our decision from previously, then how is the motion that's before us today, the notice of motion, not
Required a rescission.
how is it within the 3-month time frame where you're not allowed to reverse a decision? It's the same thing. So the decision that's been made to allow this motion today was that it isn't effectively a foreshadowed against what had been decided by council within the 3-month time frame, yet this is considered a foreshadowed, and it's exactly the same consideration in terms of whether or not the motion should have been allowed.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to respond to that?
Thanks, Mayor. I think the difficulty is maybe relitigating the decision that's already been made to allow this motion as part of the agenda. That decision has been made. And I think the decision to have it part of the agenda today was because it was about the time for considering matters as opposed to whether the resolution back in August proceeds at all. So given that your motion's before council now and that decision has been made previously prior to today's meeting, I think I'd be advising that we just proceed with the debate on that basis. And that in that context, this is still, Councillor Pugh's motion is still something that's substantively different from the motion that's in the papers.
Could you explain how it's substantially different?
Thank you. I think, Councillor, in my view, like if I'm looking at the Mayor's point 1 versus your point 2, that would be the reason why I think they're distinct. But
How is it distinct, given that your the advice about why this was not requiring a rescission motion is that it doesn't fundamentally change the decision from August, and the decision from August was to pursue a connection to Rous water. That was the decision in August. The advice from the General Manager was that the Mayor's proposed motion does not go against that motion. There's nothing in my motion that goes against that. It's just reiterating the decision that we made in August. So if the Mayor's motion is not in line with that, then it should have been a rescission motion.
yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. Stuff just gave their view before. It's ultimately a matter for the councillors as to how you want to proceed. I'm not the final word on this. So
That's okay. So the ruling today is that this is a foreshadowed, and the ruling before the agenda was that it wasn't. So there's an inconsistency there. Maybe two different people made the ruling, but I get that we need to move on.
Thank you. I did ask Councillor Pugh and Councillor Lyon, I did ask for the best way to proceed forward, and this is, I was told that a rescission wasn't required. And so I've just gone on the advice that I've got. I see this as chair as being contrary to what's in front of you. I do understand how that may be challenging for you, but I do rule that it's a foreshadowed motion and we shall go back to speech against.
It's got a question for the mover. The staff report or the staff comments note that this motion would require $300,000 to $500,000 in expenditure. Where's that money going to come from?
Councillor, the work that's being done on the emergency line does not change, and so there's nothing essentially that has to change between now and the next 6 months. We have in that time the opportunity for budgets to be adjusted, and that can come to council during that time.
Sorry, so does that mean that these, because you've asked here for staged investigation, options for workshops with community, regular progress, investigations into possible reinstatement of the hydroelectric plant. Our staff have said that that will cost, that process will cost between $300,000 and $500,000. So are you saying that that process won't start until the next financial year when budget can be allocated?
I'm saying that we will find out from staff what's possible moving forward, but some of the things that are required don't require a large amount of money to get started. Some do. There's been a lot of numbers thrown around at various points during this that are being disputed, and I would probably put that as one of them. But in the meantime, it's just getting that decision so that we're not committed to Rous in an ongoing fashion. We need to make this decision now so that those contracts aren't signed. General Manager is happy to make a comment.
Councillors, my understanding is depending on the outcome of today's meeting, staff will come back to quarterly budget review with recommendations for any budget adjustments.
When's that?
I think that would be the November meeting. We may be running out of time for that meeting, but whatever the decision is today, we'll contemplate bringing something back to the quarterly budget review to ensure that adequate budgets are available, whatever the outcome is.
Thank you.
Speech against.
Well, I wrote a little speech, so I'm going to, hang on a minute. Okay, so I've done so much reading around this and it's so interesting, all of this water stuff. I mean, I had no idea about any of it. So this is what I'm going to say are things that I've observed from my reading and that them, I don't know how accurate they are. I'm sure I'll be corrected if things are wrong. But this is, Mullumbimby's current water supply comes from Laverty's Gap Weir, which was built in the 1920s and flows through an open channel to the Mullumbimby water treatment plant, which was built in 1940. Discussions began in 2002 around what to do about Laverty's Gap. In 2002 to 3, the drought caused water shortages in Mullumbimby. In 2005, consultation with the Mullum community demonstrated a strong desire to maintain the local supply. So this has been going on for a long time, 2005. Discussions and then discussions about what to do about the Mullum water supply have been going on for 20 years, it seems to me. Meanwhile, the existing system was assessed as unable to provide secure water supply beyond 2027, which is not very long away. According to my research, reports by consultants were commissioned in 2017, 2020, 2021, 2023, and 2024. That's a lot of pages, and that's a lot of reports, and that's a lot of expense. It's clear that the water treatment plant needs to be replaced if it's able to provide safe, clean drinking water for a growing town. In the last 3 years, the recommendation by experts and consultants is that there be a permanent connection to Rous Water, a county council that services clean, safe water for 4 local government areas. The risk is that the current water treatment plant is too old and the cost to rebuild is huge. Here are my reasons why, in 56 seconds, why I support Mullumbimby connecting permanently to Rous. And also, I guess, speaking to the motion, it's, the decision not to rescind the decision of the last council meeting. There's already an existing line that is being extended so that all of Mullumbimby from Uncle Tom's will be connected to the water that the rest of Byron Shire uses. This line is already used in emergencies when Laverty's water treatment plant is unable to be used in times of drought and heavy rain. This line will be ready approximately July 2025, I believe. The costs of rebuilding Laverty's Gap are prohibitive. The water treatment plant would have to be moved to another place. It would cost ratepayers thousands of dollars extra in their rates for the next 20 years. The chances of finding funding to build this water treatment plant, I don't know where that money's going to come from. I mean, we've had a meeting. Can I say more? We had a meeting with the federal.
I'll move it 2 minutes. Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay,
What?
we'll move a 2-minute extension.
Oh, okay, great.
You're only allowed 1 per meeting, just jokes.
Okay. And we were told that if we're going to put money into this sort of enormous infrastructure, an enormous amount of money, it needs to be connected to new housing. And I, from what I can see, I don't know where that much money will come from, and I don't know whether even anyone would lend that money to council, given that there is an alternative that is already in use, actually. The final thing is that the hydroelectric power station complex up at Laverty's Gap was heritage listed by the New South Wales government in 2014. All of the land and buildings are owned by Byron Shire Council. If the decision is made that Rous be adopted, then Laverty's Gap, which is will be decommissioned, and the council will then investigate options for their long-term management. So beautiful buildings, heritage area, whatever, a park or some sort of a place where public can go to enjoy that and to enjoy the history that is there, that is embedded in that part of Mullumbimby. Council already voted to maintain the extraction licence at Laverty's Gap Reservoir to preserve options for its future use. That's already owned by Byron Council. That's not going anywhere. It just will be repurposed for other uses. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Speech 4. Councillor Warth.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the cost of this. Tenterfield Council has just put in a new water treatment plant for $9.64 million, and it was completely funded by state and federal funds. So I think we need to really reassess the cost of all this, because it may not be the great burden on the community that we're assuming. So that new plant is now functioning, and I think we should contact Tenterfield Council and go and have a meeting with them, find out how they did it, go further into their funding and who constructed it and how long it took, because we may have quite a practical solution to this rather than at the moment, we've got a very sort of vacuous thing with not a lot of good figures and a fair bit of fear around this, that it's going to be enormously expensive and, you know, that whether it's in the best interest of the community or not. I think we need to move very, very quickly on this and get some solid figures about funding and timescales. And we could possibly have a tandem system where we do connect to Rous, because we will need to decommission to actually put a new water treatment plant in. And it could be a tandem system where Rous was running at like a minimum capacity to keep the flow going, and Laverty's Gap with its new water treatment plant could be operating as the main supply. So I see that there are opportunities now that we didn't see before, and I think we should progress this, you know, without any delay.
Thank you, Councillor Warth. Speech against. Councillor Lyon.
Yeah, I'll speak against. Look, first I'll just deal with the Tenterfield option. The reason Tenterfield would have been funded by the state is because there wasn't any other option. They didn't have a regional water supply to connect to that came from a pristine rainforest catchment versus the Laverty's Gap option, which is a farmland catchment. They didn't have that option, so they would have got funding. We do have a better option, so that is going to reduce our chances of getting funding for that sort of infrastructure. Secondly, Tenterfield didn't have to do the land acquisition that we do. The land values aren't anything close to what ours are, and we can't, and it's been made really clear in the staff reports, we can't put it back on the same site. Separately to that though, there's nothing to say. The only thing that I think we could consider in here is, do we put in a proviso around the permanent connection that we can exit that when it comes to Mullumbimby, should in future we want to look into a new water treatment plant, a dosing plant to supplement it. The Laverty's Gap will always be there, but we can stay. And we can look at that in future. And so we could put a proviso on the permanent connection. But other than that, I mean, this is a really big test for this new council, and it's a test I hope we don't fail, because it's been made really clear in the staff report. We've been investigating this. I think you put it out, Councillor Swain, 22 years that this has now been on the table. And it was pitched before the last election that we've been rushing this decision. Actually, what's been happening is it's been held up in the Water and Sewer Committee for a good 10 years, kicking the can down the road to the point where we're now going to be on a permanent boil water alert. The only way that it can work, if you're talking about secure water supply, is if you have the off-stream storage. And that increases the cost in the current estimates to $81 million upfront capital cost, versus a $1.5 million connecting to Rous, which is already funded and grant funded. So in terms of our council's borrowing portfolios, it's a nonsensical thing. And we've done the investigations. We've gone through hoops and hoops in the Water and Sewer Committee over the last 2 years. And what's become really clear, and it's interesting that the members of the committee gets brought up in terms of who's on there. We had 3 Greens members, former Councillor Day, current Councillor Hauge, Councillor Ndiaye. We've got Mr. Fawcett, who presented in public access, who lives next door to the Weir and has an emotional attachment. The only person we haven't heard from on the committee is the only person that's super qualified to discuss it, and that's David Fliegelman. And he was adamant and clear. He can't comment on it publicly, and he can't comment because he's done a little bit of work for Rous and he has a conflict. But he's adamant when it comes to the cost of water supply, it's a primary thing. If you've got a much cheaper option to supply water to the community, there's a moral imperative to take that option. On top of that, this is the best environmental option. The plan to build a 2-minute extension.
Happy to move a 2-minute extension, seconded by Councillor Pugh. Those in favour? We're all in favour. Yeah.
We're talking about water coming from a rainforest catchment that requires no infrastructure other than infrastructure that's already funded and being built to supply the rest of Mullumbimby, versus a farmland catchment, which will need an off-stream storage, which involves digging 100,000 cubic metres of soil out of the slopes in the Wilsons Valley Flats, packing it up into a big, with excavators going, packing up to a massive wall to create a huge 200,000 cubic metre hole for the 200 megalitre dam, which then has to go to a water treatment plant at the bottom of the flats, and then you have to pump it uphill using a massive pump to get to the 20-30 metre head to Azalea Street, to then gravity feed it to Mullumbimby, versus turning on a valve from Rocky Creek Dam and having it gravity feed all the way through from St Helena to the taps of Mullumbimby. For us to be lobbying that cost onto residents at this time and at any time, but especially at this time of cost of living, $350 odd each and every household in the Shire. Now, is this the worst decision to defer for 2 years? No, not if you end up with if they get the right decision in the end, but the risk that you take and the money, it's just another $500,000. You know, council can afford it. Sure, we can do that. You know, we can keep all of the staff time going. We can, you know, keep doing the 7 to 9 times a year of emergency loan. We can do all of that. But I can tell you it's a waste of time and money. You're going to come to the same point. You're going to come to the same decision. And if you don't come to the same decision, it will be one of the worst decisions the Byron Shire Council has ever made. We had estimates done 2 years ago which showed categorically this was the way forward. 2 years on, we've got an update to those estimates, and it tripled the difference between the net present values. Environmentally and financially, it's clear what we need to do. Let's do it.
Speech 4. Councillor Pugh.
I'd like to request an opportunity to speak, please. If I have to be for it, I may change my vote by the end.
No problem at all, Councillor Pugh.
Thank you. Unless someone else wants to speak for. No. Just to you, Councillor Warth, what you're saying is exactly what I'm proposing in my alternative motion. I'm saying we need to connect to Rous so that we've got certainty of supply, and then we need to investigate a smaller plant that sits within the current infrastructure. As Councillor Lyon just said, this project with off-stream storage will never happen. This is exactly the same thing as we went through with the rail trail. Endless reports, endless questions until you get to, and you delay by 10 years, you cost council hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, now with the rail trail, the cost of building the rail trail is now tens of millions of dollars more than had we have made a decision 5 or 10 years ago. Exactly the same thing will be happening here. I understand people are questioning some of the costings, but even best case scenario we heard from Mr. Fawcett today is that a off-stream storage, new treatment plant and pipeline would not even be built and ready to run for 7 years. Now that's best case scenario from someone who supports that project. Do you think construction costs are going to be the same in 7 years as the costings we've already done? They will continue to.
I think you said somewhere they were going to go down.
Excuse me? Can I keep speaking? You think construction costs are going to not keep increasing like they are at the moment? The cost to residents if this project went ahead and was finished in 7 years, will be astronomical. It's already going to cost about $350 per household. That is totally unfair. It's totally unfair on staff who are trying to keep healthy, safe water flowing to the whole Shire, to distract them for another 2 years, when they could be doing other work, improving our systems, doing other studies that we need for our water system. This is going to cost between $300,000 and $500,000 to ask the same questions to get the same answers. It is a completely and utterly irresponsible decision to not secure Mullumbimby's water supply so that it is safe and healthy to drink. I understand that some people don't like the outcome. They don't like the answers to the questions that have been asked. It doesn't mean you just keep asking different questions until you get the answer that you want. That does not lead to good outcomes. It leads to endless delay. It leads to endless cost increases. And now, and I use the rail trail as an example, but this is about healthy and safe water. It's not about a nice walking path. This is a serious decision for serious people, and to delay and risk the safety and healthy drinking water of Mullumbimby would be an absolute travesty. So Councillor Warth, others, I ask you to support my motion, which does what you want to do, which is to have the secure water, but then also investigate a smaller plant that's not trying to supply all of Mullumbimby, but rather to supplement Mullumbimby so that you have that diversity of supply, you have that sustainability, you have that connection, and you do it in a right way that's not going to cost every resident in the Shire $350 per year. Thank you.
My apologies for interrupting. Councillor Warth, did you have a question?
Yeah. Basically, I think this could be used
Who's
as
the
a
question to? Sorry.
Sorry.
Who are you asking a question of? Is it of a
Oh, I'm
staff
just
or-
making a clarification about costs and stuff like that.
Okay, so when we want to speak, we either have a question or we're speaking for or against. We have to try and, so whatever you're trying to say, you kind of shape it into a question for someone.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is basically, it's being touted as one or the other. In answer to that question, is that I could see this as being a tandem system with the connection to Rous that we have to have anyway if we're going to decommission and work on the treatment plant for Laverty's Gap. But then the two could run together, which would give us a good supply from Laverty's plus a constant supply from Rous with whatever we needed in excess of what Laverty's was actually producing. So I
Councillor
see it
Warth,
more as a
So is
tandem
that's a
system.
I
question
will-
for
I will-
staff, is it?
I will ask you, so obviously you're becoming familiar with the protocols and ways, but yeah, it's either a short question to staff, which you either get or you speak when it's for and against, but we only really get one bite of the cherry in that regard. Councillor Dodds was next, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Pugh.
Question for staff. It's around the potential impacts on future housing supply. So the previous council, as everyone knows, adopted the Byron Shire Residential Strategy 2041. Of the various investigation areas in and around Mullen, by my count, there's about 500, potentially more dwellings, all of which are to be captured by the Affordable Housing Contribution Scheme. So that's around 75 permanent affordable dwellings in the pipeline, which I know we're all interested and passionate to support. Furthermore, the old Mullen Hospital site has potential to provide even more permanent publicly owned affordable housing, depending on the outcomes of the final design that's put forth. It's my understanding from reading the background reports that the supply of water from Laverty's Gap is projected to hit capacity in 2027. Now that's about 2 years away. If we defer, if we wait even more, if we defer and then choose to construct new upstream storage, new water treatment plant, new pipelines, as Asren and Mr. Fawcett and others pointed out, we're probably, best case scenario, 7 or 8 years away before that additional water supply can be turned on. So my question is, if we're deferring, if we're building the off-stream storage and retaining connection to Laverty's only, what are the potential impacts on Mullumbimby being able to supply any new or affordable housing after 2027 if its water is hit capacity and we're waiting another 5+ years? Are we just essentially cutting ourselves off at the knees and not enabling us to provide that much needed housing in a housing crisis because we're waiting to build a new water supply system for Mullumbimby?
Thank you, Councillor Dodds. And I will ask councillors, just for the sake of expediency, if we can try and have concise questions, but it's a very good question.
Apologies.
I shall hand over to staff to respond.
That's certainly a potential risk, so we would have to evaluate when it hit capacity.
You might need to come a little bit closer to the microphone. And I think for people online, it's nice to say who's
Sorry.
speaking.
Christopher Soulsby, I'm the acting director at the moment. There is a risk associated with the delay. That risk may be mitigated because we would be connecting to Rous while we decommission the existing plant.
So we would potentially have that capacity to service there. And any new water treatment plant at Laverty's Gap would be built to maintain that additional capacity that we need to supply the demand for new housing. So there's going to be an interim period, regardless, where we've probably got to connect to Rous to undertake the reconstruction or the construction of a new treatment plant. That will mitigate against that risk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Pugh?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe assist Councillor Warth and also just pick up something that Councillor Lyon said. Is it a question to staff? Is it possible to negotiate an agreement with Rous that would allow that flexibility? So to sign an agreement with them to connect, but then if further studies, when council decides to construct a smaller plant as per my motion, to then adjust the volumes that we're getting from Rous. Could you have that kind of a flexibility in an agreement with Rous? So let's say you signed it and then in 5 years or in 10 years, we did construct a supplementary water treatment plant and then our volumes from Rous came down. Like, is that a possibility?
Cameron Clark, Manager for Utilities. We'd have to seek clarification from Rous for that through the service level agreement.
Okay.
Councillor Hauge?
Yeah, I just got a question for Councillor Pugh. The wording that's on the screen at the moment, we've got in point 3 about potentially negotiating an interim agreement, but then in point 4, obviously we've specifically mentioned the off-stream storage. Would you be comfortable if we added wording in there about also specifically investigating the hybrid option, because there actually hasn't been investigation thoroughly done into that. So if that's an option you'd like to pursue, we'd need more investigation for that as well.
That's your motion. That's entirely up to you. I won't be voting for it because it's not about connecting to Rous. We need to connect to Rous.
It is about connecting to Rous.
We need to continue with the previous motion, so to connect to Rous.
I'd be happy to include it anyway, because as you pointed out, it isn't something that we've looked at. Would you have some suggested wording?
Yeah, could we add then into point 4, after the words including off-stream storage, or a hybrid solution with Laverty's Gap and Rous water?
Question
Councillor
for
Dodds.
staff. This probably isn't able to be answered right now, but if a hybrid option like that was decided on and it was supplementary, the supply coming from Laverty's Gap, and that therefore negated the need for off-stream storage, construction of that reservoir, etc., and it was just a smaller, more nimble new treatment plant that supplemented the supply, what percentage of the costs are just in the treatment plant versus buying the land, building the reservoir, doing the excavation? I know it's difficult, but it's ballpark. Are we talking about 9 million odd, like Councillor Warth pointed out, for Tenterfield, or given the constraints of the topography and the site and the conditions, is it still going to be potentially much more expensive than that?
Cameron Clark, Manager of Utilities. That hybrid model would have to be further investigated and reported back. I could not answer that question today correctly.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Further question. My apologies,
Yeah,
Councillor.
like I'm just reading the motion. I'm just trying to understand, and it's a question for staff. Just firstly, how do we continue a staged investigation into integrated water supply options? Like, how can something that we've already investigated be continued? Given that the only real, I just can't see like how you can continue something you've already done. And yes, there is part A, and like, so you can ask the community for a workshop. Progress reports irrelevant. Hydroelectric, clearly in the staff report, not feasible. How do we continue something we've already done?
would carry out it again. We have a different stakeholder engagement plan, a reviewed one, bring it back to the committee and redo the engagement, and through that, the multi-criteria analysis to be carried out again.
And how would we anticipate getting any different result on either, and I can see the social result could change because there was just some assumptions there about social, but on the environmental and financial, which are intricately linked to social anyway, and in my view, far more important because of that. How would those two options, how could those two things change in any way with further investigation that you can see?
We could get it peer reviewed, so you get an alternative, I guess, hydrological consultant to review that work again, or you could go out to an alternative consultant to update the work. You may end up with the same answer again.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just make an adjustment there from in point 4 after storage and instead of or? Including off-stream storage and a hybrid solution. It's not one or the other. We had Councillor Pugh's speech for. Do we have a speech against?
I'll make a brief speech against. I understand this, the connection that a lot of people have to Levities. We went up there, we walked it. It's a stunning asset. It's a beautiful piece of land. The environmental qualities are phenomenal. And I can understand the passion and the emotion that a lot of people rightly feel in their connection and the nostalgia associated with that. But I think that can only go so far in influencing how a decision is made moving forward on this. Because ultimately we're asking council, and by extension, our residents to bear an enormous financial burden, no matter what happens here. You know, even if that report did come back and there were different types of treatment plants that were newer and more nimble and had a lower cost, if the land acquisition could be revised to come down, because I know some people were querying why that was so high, you're still looking in the order of tens of millions of dollars more than simply connecting to Rous and investigating potential supplementary supply from Levities via a smaller plant without the need for the off-stream storage. But aside from that, what mostly sits badly with me is just explaining to everyone who doesn't live in Mullen, in Byron Shire, that they are going to have to bear the financial responsibility of paying for this connection, this new connection, to keep Levities operational. I couldn't go and knock on the door of a single mum in Ocean Shores and say, hey, you're going to have to pay $350 more every year for the next 20 years because we have indebted ourselves to keep this water supply for Mullumbimby, which has no effect on you. You live in Ocean Shores, you're connected to Rous water. You're perfectly happy with your water supply. I live in Ewingsdale, I'm connected to Rous water. I'm happily connected to that water supply. I drank it this morning, it's delicious. I just don't understand, I'm unconvinced by any of the alternative reasons as to why this needs to be pursued, again, delayed, to most likely come up with the exact same result. I think it's financially irresponsible for us as the bearers of these decisions to put that on staff, on council, and on the community by extension. And for that reason, I can't support it, and I'll be supporting Councillor Pugh's foreshadowed motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Brickley, just in relation to the cost. It's been raised that residents in other areas would be subsidising the cost in Mullumbimby. Looking at the figures in retrospect, is that what's been happening for the last 20 or so years with Mullumbimby's water costing a lot less to produce compared to what we pay Rous. Because everyone at the moment pays the same. We have a standard rate for water across the Shire, no matter where it's coming from. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. There is one charge because the council only operates one water fund. It just happens to have two supplies for the water fund. It would be very difficult to determine what Mullumbimby is subsidising because to really do that, you'd actually have to split it off into its own fund and then work out how it would operate. It'd just be too difficult to work that out. So,
follow-up question. So we're not keeping a track of how much Mullumbimby is owed by the rest of the Shire for providing the cheaper water, is that correct? And wouldn't you define that as a sunk cost in any case, and we need to look at things going forward rather than looking back?
in setting the charges, council has done that on the basis of it as a one unified fund. So yeah, we can't go back and change that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Can I ask another question? Writing off the back of Councillor Lyon's comment on sunk costs, question on opportunity cost. If we did saddle ourselves with this amount of debt, which by my calculations, depending on what it costs, could be costing us almost $3 to $4 million a year in interest alone. What are the opportunity costs from your perspective as to how that might hamstring our ability to get funding for other projects, to present ourselves as, financially liquid and responsible, and any downstream effects that might have, I guess, opportunity costs on getting funding for other major projects?
That's a very good question. It's just coincidentally, Council's Bank contacted me last week because they read our agendas and they spoke about the potential for those loan borrowings. So I actually quizzed them on how do they actually assess our loans. I know this question's been raised before. Essentially, one of the things the bank looks at is that they look at our own source income, which is about 105 million a year. They multiply that by 2, and that seems to be what they consider our borrowing capacity. But then they look at also what the purpose of the borrowing is for, whether it's worthwhile. So they consider that. But so if you take that, we've got a potential $210 million borrowing capacity. If you lob in a massive project like this one, that would obviously limit the potential for council to go and borrow for other things it may want to do in the general fund or other activities it may want to do. So yes, it would create a limitation. And of course, borrowing a loan of that size, the repayments have to be paid for, including substantial interest.
Thank you very much. Can I ask another follow-up question? Just to all councillors to consider what we could spend $3 to $4 million a year, which is what the interest would probably be costing us on other projects that this community could do with.
Perhaps it's worth clarifying how council money is segregated into different funds so that money that's saved in a water fund can't be spent on placemaking, for example.
True.
Just to clarify on that though, what you're saying, Mr. Brickley, is that irrespective of the fund, the bank looks at our total borrowings in any fund in determining future borrowings. So if we have $80 million borrowings on the books, that impacts any ability in any other fund in terms of what we may be able to borrow. Thank you.
I've got a question too. If we decide to try and fund the rebuilding of the water treatment plant at Laverty's Gap, and you apply for that to borrow that amount of money, what happens if they say no?
If the bank says no, you can try another bank. It doesn't mean we have to try and get a loan from the bank we always bank with, or you have to come up with some other alternative to fund it if you still wish to proceed it.
Any further questions? Did anyone want to speak? Yes, sorry, Councillor Warth.
Yes, question for council staff. If we went for this hybrid system and we only had to come up with the money, 9.64 million for a water treatment plant, and then have the hybrid system running with a connection to Rous and Laverty's working at the same time, would that be, in your opinion, a cost-effective way of providing water for Mullumbimby?
Councillor Warth, I'd have to say I'm not an engineer. I couldn't understand whether that would be an appropriate option or not. Yeah.
Cameron Clark, Manager for Utilities. I'd have to go and investigate that and report back to council exactly what the cost and benefits of that would be to do that body of work.
Any further questions? Any further speakers? Okay, I shall utilise my right of reply. Look, it's great we're having another robust conversation about this, and Asren, there were some great ideas you put forward about a hybrid model. Again, we're asking staff to answer questions that we're not equipped to answer because we haven't done enough research. This isn't a decision that I think any of us are making lightly without thorough research, and I make it with no spite or hostility or disrespect to other people in the room. I understand that operationally it probably does make more sense to cut off that arm of when you're looking at efficiencies as an operation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's ethically right, environmentally right, or socially right in the longer term when we're looking at sustainability. The cost from water ongoing from Rous is expensive and being grossly underestimated, especially if you look at it. And we're looking at this 20 to 25-year term because we have to, because that's the way loans work. But we're looking at a piece of infrastructure that's 70 to 100 years. It's not just a generational decision, it's a multi-generational decision that we're making. And so it requires really deep consideration. I've heard a lot of fear-mongering going on. I felt very spoken down to at various points. But imagine if our ancestors, the people that built the dam, had that same limited foresight. They thought, oh, no, that's going to cost too much. We can't build the wall that high. We'll just have it smaller. We need to hold that responsibility for our grandchildren and beyond and make sure that they have water in the future. The idea that spending $80 million, if that's what it is, being an outrageous sum of money, when we're looking at an off-road ramp to address the problem on the Pacific Highway, we were quoted the upper limit of $75 million 4 years ago. Infrastructure for the community costs a lot of money. The roundabout 10 years ago, or 6 years ago, was $5 million. So investing in water, an essential asset, is critical. We're also seeing in the news at the moment problems with various water treatment plants, with PFAS and other problems. We don't know what the future holds, but having a diversity of supply is a really important thing. We already have that space taken. We already have that infrastructure there. It can be improved, and we need to take further consideration, in my opinion. I don't think speaking on David Fliegelman's behalf is appropriate either, Councillor Lyon, because I've had different conversations with him, which I wouldn't bring up here, but if someone's not supposed to speak to something because they have a conflict of interest, I don't think it's in our interest to bring them into the discussion. Mullumbimby has subsidised water across the Shire, and that's okay. But to then look and go, well, no, you can't keep your supply because that's going to cost us money in a different way. We've set up a precedent, whether it's a sunk cost. Could I have an extension, please? A 2-minute extension. Thank you, Councillor Dodds. Those in favour? All in favour. We have been, in a sense, subsidising the community of Mullumbimby, subsidising the rest of the Shire. And the idea of a dual operation where parts of Mullumbimby are supplied by Rous and others are supplied by Laverty's Gap's totally acceptable if it's feasible and possible. I can definitely say Rous does not know where it is getting its money from. So to say that the environmental costs are less is being made with absolute, you can't make that decision because you cannot say whether there's going to be a desalination plant, the Noon Dam, getting water from underground that sits in native tidal lands. There's all sorts of complications with getting water, but it's critically important and we must take the community along with us. Even if your decision is the other opposite decision is the correct one that we land at, we have to take the community with us. But I believe there's an opportunity here for us to get something better, to respect that heritage and to look forward into the future and get a better outcome. So I'd like your support today, but I understand we're divided on this issue. It was very much so during the election, but the community were really clear to me when I was speaking to them, and I suppose to others that had this in part of their platform, which is more than 50%, that they really wanted us to investigate this further. We're not committing to an outcome, we're committing to further investigation. And questions were raised again today. Information was supplied to us we've never seen again in the last 24 hours that are critical to this decision making. And that's not right. We can do better. So I hope you can support this, but I understand if you can't. But I really appreciate everybody putting their head into it at the beginning of the election. Beginning of our term, and it was just a shame that the other decision was made right on the last meeting of the last term. Those in favour of the motion. Councillors Lowe, Hauge, Ndiaye and Warth. Those against. Councillors Lyon, Dodds, Swain and Pugh. That motion passes.